there are so many reasons why I got into teaching.
One of the best things is the light bulb moment.
When you see a pupil suddenly understand something, that's really, really special.
Every child is so full of potential, and the thing that makes me proudest to be a teacher is seeing them realise what they are capable of.
I don't think any other job can give you the same satisfaction.
That's why I chose to teach.
You could get £26,000 tax-free to train. Search, apply to teach. Selected subjects only, subject to eligibility.
Ladies and gentlemen. Podcasting since 2005. You were listening to Gamertag Radio with your hosts Godfrey, Pete Rock, Parris, Pasta. Come on. Yeah.
We are in London right now. We're at the Assassin's Creed Syndicate preview event. I'm here with Pete. What's up?
How you doing?
Good, man. It's been a crazy last couple of days, but
yes, it has.
You know, for everyone out there listening, we're out here in London. We've been seeing the sights. We've had some hands-on time with Assassin's Creed Syndicate. We're definitely going to give you our impressions on that. But before we do, we have 3 interviews coming up. First one is with the historian for 19th century London. Her name was Judith Flanders. Second one is going to be with the actual creative director for Assassin's Creed Syndicate. His name is Marc-Alexis Cote. And then the final interview we have is with the audio director, and her name is Lydia Andrew. So let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to play those interviews, and then when we come back, Pete and I will just get into our impressions of the game.
Voicemail 786-2737-GTR.
All right, and this is Parris with Gamertag Radio. I'm here in London at the Assassin's Creed Syndicate event, and I have someone to talk about the history of 19th century London. So can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Judith Flanders. I was the historical consultant.
Judith, thank you for joining me. You gave a speech earlier where you're talking about 19th century London. I believe it's 1868 is right. The year that this has actually happened. I found it quite fascinating while you're up there talking. So can you kind of go into the history, that time period, and how that relates to the game that we're about to play?
In London in the 19th century was, first of all, the largest city that had ever existed in the world. And it was the heart of the British Empire, which had been expanding over the last 100 years. It was also the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So you've got all of these forces coming together and recreating society, taking a society which had been pretty static. What you were born into was what you were going to die in. You didn't have much possibility or much choice, and suddenly there was a world where possibility and choice existed.
While you were up there talking earlier, you were mentioning the various dialects, like the way you would address someone. Like if I was a poor person addressing a rich person, it would be very different, depending on that. So go on that a little bit.
Today we live in the West in very flat societies. We treat everybody as being equal, and this is, of course, an admirable thing. But in the 19th century, it was still a very hierarchical society, the way you see more in Japan, say, or in India, where people who are older are spoken to in a different way. They automatically get deference and respect. Or people who are younger are spoken to more sharply. They are automatically just told what to do. In the 19th century, who you were, what you did, where you came from, and the same for the person you were speaking to, changed the way you spoke. So you introduced yourself. You said, "Hi, I'm Parris." In the 19th century, you would have told me your last name, and I would call you Mr. You would call me Miss. And if you were somebody I worked with every day, you would probably still call me Miss Flanders. But if we got to be really close, you might call me Miss Judith. I would probably never call you anything except Mr. Because women didn't call men by their first names ever. until, you could get engaged to somebody before you called them by their first name. So we worked very hard on building in this kind of verbal social structure so that when one character speaks to another, if you know how to read the society, you know who these people are. And even for, let's face it, 99.9% of the gamers who will not know the society, your ear becomes attuned and you begin to pick up clues. You don't know you're doing it, but it becomes part of the world.
Now, just again, going because I find the whole thing very, very fascinating when you were talking before. So I know I'm kind of having you repeat some of the things you said, but I want everyone listening to hear as well. You talked about, like with the police, for example, some of the changes in the game that you had to make to make it more accessible where people were playing. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, we made some changes simply so that gameplay could happen. The streets in London, for example, were enormously crowded. New York City looks like a walk in the park compared to what the streets of London were like. But obviously, you can't chase somebody down a street that is so long. I mean, what are you going to do? Get that assassin. Oh, sorry, traffic jam.
Right.
I mean, that's not fun. So the streets are much emptier. Equally, for the same reasons, they're much wider than they would have been in the 19th century, just so that we can actually get the game going. Again, for narrative purposes, the police in Britain have never been armed. They were not armed in the 19th century. They're not armed in the 20th century. And thank God they still, for the most part, remain unarmed in the 21st century. It's something we're actually quite proud of, that we can be policed without people pointing guns at us. I know Americans look a little startled at this. In the game, for the purposes of the game, the police have guns. That kind of distressed me, but I was enormously brave and lived with it. It works for the game.
Right. So carriages, that was another thing that just off the top of my head, I was like, wow, I never would have thought of that. You compared carriages to modern day as if it was a Lamborghini. So can you kind of talk about why you said that?
We work under the assumption that carriages were like cars, that, it's just like for like. Carriages were phenomenally expensive, as well as the initial cost of the carriage and the initial cost of the horse. You had to have a place to keep your horse. You had to have a stable.
Right.
You had to have a stable boy to look after it. You had to have a coachman to drive it. You had to feed your horse. You had to pay vet bills. So the ongoing costs were tremendous. We have some figures that suggest that in London in 1851, so just before this game, the population then was about 2.5 million, and there were about 15,000 carriages in London, which includes carriages for hire, i.e. cabs. So this is, and my math is probably off, your listeners can phone in and tell me I can't count, something like 0.05% of the population had a carriage. So it's not even like having a car, it's not even like having a fancy car, it's like having a Lamborghini.
Yeah, it completely blew my mind to hear that, but I guess it makes sense.
And it's why they were status symbols.
Yeah, absolutely. So final question, we're running out of time here. So in the gameplay that we're doing today, we're able to see the Whitechapel section and we're seeing Westminster, if I believe correct. So can you talk about some of the historical landmarks and things that people should look for in the game while they're playing?
Well, Whitechapel was the district of the immigrants. It was the district of the poor. It was also not far from the docks. The docks were the single largest employer in London. 2 million people were employed in the docks. So you had sailors, you had foreigners, you had all sorts of people coming through as transients. So it was considered to be quite a dangerous place. On the whole, it was where very poor people lived, and they lived in what were called courts. Anything court, name court, meant this was not a place you wanted to be.
Right.
And it was kind of like a street behind a street. It was a dead end. You walked down, it was unpaved. The houses that were there, therefore, only had windows on one side because they backed onto this dead end. They tended not to have running water. They absolutely didn't have sewage. So you can see in the game the center of each court will have water running down it. Because we're nice guys, we only made it water visible. It's actually sewage. It's human waste. By contrast, Whitehall, which is where the Houses of Parliament are, it's where Westminster Abbey is, this is the seat of power. This is where the rich live, and it's where the rich go to their clubs. It's where they operate politically. So it's where the carriages are. And it's where those sites of London, Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament, things that we even recognize today, you also see in the game.
Right. Well, Judith, I'm a history buff, so I could talk to you forever about this, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Voicemail 786-2737-GTR.
Your season-long fantasy football team may be going strong, but you don't have to wait until Week 16 to get paid. Put your fantasy skills to the test every week this season at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. One-week fantasy means no season-long commitments. Got an injured player? No problem. It's like a new season every week, so you're never stuck with the same players. And get this, DraftKings is crowning a new millionaire every week this season. You could turn your love of football into a life-changing payday. Just pick your players, pile up the points, pick up your cash, that's it. Believe me, you've never experienced football like this before. This isn't fantasy as usual, this is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. And like we've been telling you guys all season, folks, NFL is finally here. It's football time. We're ready to go. You don't have to be stuck in your typical fantasy draft leagues. You could do DraftKings, and every week is a new week. So I'm super excited to get this going now. So let's get into some DraftKings. But before you do, hurry over to DraftKings now and use our promo code Gamertag to play for a free shot at $1 million in this week's Millionaire Maker event. Enter Gamertag for a free entry now only at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. Once again, DraftKings.com.
This is Gamertag Radio. Voicemail 786-2737-GTR.
All right, this is Parris and I'm with Peter. We're back here again at the Assassin's Creed Syndicate event, and we have the creative director, Marc-Alexis Cote. Thank you for joining us.
The pleasure is all mine.
Now, talk to me about Assassin's Creed. Talk to me about Syndicate. Why are we in London? Why are we in the mid-1800s?
So Assassin's Creed Syndicate is set in London, and the reason we chose this city is because and especially this era, is because it was an era that brought modernity into the world. And by using this context, we can, I think, freshen up the franchise, freshen up Assassin's Creed a lot, bring a lot of new innovations into the game. So this was really one of the main ideas behind setting the game in London, which was the epicenter of the Industrial Revolution that completely changed the world.
Now, you talked about some innovations that you're bringing into the game. What are some of those?
So some of the main innovations, just in terms of navigation that we're bringing to the game is the rope launcher that I don't know if you've had the chance to play with it yet, but you'll see once you start using the rope launcher to climb buildings, to cross the streets of London, it completely changes the way you approach objectives and approach moving throughout the city. Another big change for the franchise is the introduction of systemic vehicles. So you've got carriages, you can up on any carriage that you see. You can hide in them. You can perform assassination from those carriages. You can fight on top of them. You can recruit your gang and have them come with you on a carriage, which is something that's amazing because you've got gunfights from the top of those vehicles that can happen. So there's a lot of what we call systemic events that can happen because of the addition of those vehicles.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was the inclusion of vehicles. It was never really an important feature of the Assassin's Creed franchise, and now that you guys are bringing it across, what was the thought process behind bringing in vehicles, and why now?
The reason is because of the era. This is the first time, the first period that we do in Assassin's Creed from which we have pictures in movies. So I was looking through the British Library archives at some videos from the a bit later than the game, like 10, 15 years later, like in the 1880s, like the first videos that were ever made. And you see those streets are filled with vehicles. And we just could not reproduce London in 1868 with any form of credibility without having vehicles. So they were first there to make the setting feel credible for our players. But then it changed kind of everything. It changed how we approach building the city, which have like wider streets, and the pedestrians are now on the sidewalks. And once we started building it this way, building prototypes, we realized that this would be a game changer for how we perceive the city. It made it feel much more logical, because like people would just not be walking in the middle of the streets. They would be like more structured, which is another thing that's really particular of the English culture. It's like it's more structured than what we've seen in past Assassin's Creed.
Now, you talked about where you're completely recreating London. Again, this is an 1868 and this is an open world game. How much creative freedom are you giving the players?
We're giving them more freedom than we've ever given them, in the sense that they can explore the entire world almost from the start. And one of the great activities that you can do in the game is try to conquer London. This is the best way for you as a player to upgrade your characters, Jacob and Evie, upgrade your weapons and everything. And you can do that in any way that you want with any of the two characters that you choose, the one that resonates the most with you. So there's more freedom in Assassin's Creed Syndicate than there's ever been.
Now, you just mentioned the two main characters, Evie and Jacob. Can you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, so for the first time in the history of the franchise, you've got two characters that you can choose to play as. You can choose in the open world if you'd rather play as Jacob and Evie, and you can interchange. It's not a choice that you make that's permanent. And in the story, you'll play some missions as Jacob and some missions as Evie. But I think for me, it's great in terms of gameplay, because it allows you to upgrade two different assassins that you can use in different situations. But for me, it also refreshes the way we tell the story. Having this constant bickering between the two twins is something that I think you'll find that's very characteristic of the game. It brings a smile on our face. Look, I've played the game so many times now, and I still laugh when I play it. So I think it's a game that's going to bring a lot of joy to people who play it.
That's one of the things from our opportunity to have our hands on the game. I've noticed that it's playing two different games within the same title, because both of the characters are very obviously dangerous because they're assassins, but they have their own methods to killing. Do you have any? Trying to think of how to word this properly so I can get an answer from you guys. Do you guys have any fear that maybe the violence that comes across in this game may turn away some people?
I honestly don't think so, because the violence has a context. You know, the enemies, the Blighters, the Templars, they're not nice people. They almost enslave children. They are trying to control the world. So behind the scenes, yes, you are performing violence. You are performing violence to try to free the world and to make it a better place. But this is the irony that's always been in the Creed itself, is that you have to sometimes you take out people as an assassin before they do something bad, because you know they're going to do something bad. You're preventing them from doing something bad. So all this, I think, is stuff that makes us think about the society in which we live in as well.
Okay, let's get back to gameplay here real quick. So, obviously there's a main story that we're playing with the two characters, but can you talk a little bit about some of the side missions and extra things that you're able to do in the game?
So one of the things that I hope players will find entertaining in Assassin's Creed Syndicate is that you meet people who forged our society today. You'll meet Charles Darwin, for example, and he's going to help you on your main quest, but then you can embark on a side quest, on a series of side quests with him, while you get to deepen your knowledge of what Charles Darwin has done for humanity. And then you can do the same thing with Charles Dickens. It's a famous author. You can meet Karl Marx. And again, it's not about taking a position. It's about here is what happened, and it's just encouraging people to go and find out more information on their own. what I like to say is that Assassin's Creed is a lot about exposing players to historical context without taking position. But it creates so much interest in our fans. It's just incredible. When I sometimes get a chance to talk with fans and they tell me how much they've learned through the games. They've learned stuff, but it ignited in them a desire to learn more, which I think is something that not that many games can do. But this is what makes Assassin's Creed special for me, and I think for a lot of fans.
So going into weapons and customizations, like I noticed just tinkering a little bit, I noticed like I could have a sword and then I could spend some skill points.
A cane sword.
Cane sword. Yeah, that's right. Keyword, cane sword. But I could spend some money and I can upgrade it. So can you kind of go down that path on how that's going to work in the game?
So you've got 3 types of weapons on which you can invest or that you can equip. And it's really a question of what fits more your style. Some will be more lethal, some will stun enemies faster. So you've got a kukri knife, which is something that Henry Green, the Indian assassin that's still in London, first introduces our players, our characters to. So this is one type of weapon. It's kind of a short, like a machete kind of a style that you can hide under your clothes. You can fight with brass knuckles and with the cane sword. I think the cane sword for me is it's kind of my favorite because sometimes I don't know why I like to equip Evie with this type of weapon. Maybe it's because she's got outfits that boost the power of her cane swords. But she looks amazing as she clubs enemies around with her cane sword. So again, a lot of this comes down to your play style, but then you can invest on bracers that improve your defense because you block with your bracer. You can invest on guns as well. And I think this is one of the areas in the game that I like to invest the most on because it's really, it becomes a really powerful tool. You start the game with a one shooter, it's got only one bullet, but you can have a Colt revolver. You can because this is the era in which the Colt was invented. So we can play with some of those legendary weapons from the late 1800s. So lots of stuff for players to collect and invest on.
Now I want to come back to the cane sword because it brings me to another topic I want to get into. But you just hit on something that made me think about this. So with the 2 characters, while we're playing through the game, because you say custom to your play style, how you want to play. So let's say Edie, I have a certain way I want to play with her. I want to go through the entire game with her. Is that possible, or are there certain missions where I have to use one assassin or the other?
So you can play the entire open world with either character and switch back and forth between the 2. You're not penalized if you do that, in the sense that when you get a skill point, you can both Jacob and Evie obtain it.
Okay.
So we're very generous in that way because we want players to be able to switch between both. And also, there are some missions that you need to play with Jacob to see Jacob's perspective on things, and others that you have to play with Evie. From a narrative point of view, this is super important for us because it allows Jacob and Evie to have their own arc and for these narrative arcs to bounce on each other.
Can you give us a description of both Jacob and Evie's differences battle-wise and how they're used in the game?
So battle-wise, Jacob has just a few more skills in terms of fighting. So he can take a lot more damage than Evie if you decide to invest on those skills. This skill is locked for him, and he's got an amazing ability that's what we call gunslinger. So instead of when you do a counter move in the game, he can actually counter shoot people. So if you just time it right and pull it off, you can take down. It's much easier to go in a crowd of enemies and take them out. Evie, on the other hand, her skills allow her to take out enemies before entering in combat. So she's got the chameleon skill, which allows her to almost stop her breathing and become invisible. And this becomes a super powerful tool in what we call the black box mission, for example, in which that we demoed at Gamescom.
Okay, I'm still going to come back to that cane sword, but I want to hit on something else before I forget. So the gangs, how important are the gangs to just the structure of the game and just how you're going to traverse through it?
So Jacob starts out by, he really wants to build his gang. He's convinced. Jacob is a bit like a kid. He's got an idea, and now he's like, he absolutely needs to pursue that.
Right.
So he's like, we're going to try something new because, you know what, Evie? The assassins haven't kind of really been successful over the last 1,000 years doing it your way and our father's way. So maybe we should try it my way. Let's build a gang and let's go destroy Crawford Starrick's organization. And Evie's like, maybe we should be a bit more careful. But they still start building this gang together. Right. So it's something that Evie grows to learn and understand that it can be useful in the game. And appreciate it. And it's for you as a player to make them useful. If you invest on your rooks, they can become a very powerful organization. So the more you conquer the city, the more you will see rooks throughout the city. And then there's the city itself has its own skill tree that you haven't seen yet. I don't think you're there yet in the game, but you'll see there's about 20 skills that you can purchase. Some of them are to make your rooks better, to make them higher level, to equip them with weapons, to equip them with vehicles. So sometimes you'll see them moving around the city with their own vehicles. You can hop on it, they give it to you, you recruit more rooks, and then they come with you in the Growler. So it's like having your own small private army. And when you start doing activities like cargo hijacks, I love to do them. I just come in with all my rooks, try to shoot down a bunch of enemies and run away with the Blighter's cargo. So it's up to you as a player to invest on this tool and make it useful for you.
Still not going to get to that cane sword yet, but I got one more before I get to that. So Evie and Jacob, I think it's very important because you mentioned this in the presentation, that they're also new to London as well. Mm-hmm. So they're discovering the city at the same time as you are. So why did you go with that route on the game?
Because we want to have kind of a fusion between what the player feels and what our protagonists feel, so that they can echo each other. So that's why we wanted them to discover the city and to be amazed by it at the same time as we try to impress and amaze the player.
Okay. Cane sword. So this is the reason why I wanted to...
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
No. Just one more. No. So the reason I kept wanting to come back to that is because talking to Judith before I talked to you, we were talking about the cane sword and how it's not historic. It's historically accurate in the sense she found it, but it wasn't the common use, to describe that item.
The sword stick.
And the same with the police. I mean, they didn't carry guns at that time, but in this game that they do. So when we talk about being historically accurate in the game, I mean, the music, the dialogue, and everything. I mean, how accurate are we going to be, and how important was that to you to try and get as close as possible?
So we try to make something. Our first goal is to make something that is credible, to make as credible as possible. But it still has to be a game, right? And we're not doing a simulation of London, because we're not recreating the city one-to-one, for example. So you see the city is a bit shrunk down, but we keep the landmarks the same size. For example, Westminster Palace, the Thames, but we make it feel like it's London. And it's one of the things that Judith and I talked a lot about, which is like, what are the elements that will give this credibility, this authenticity to this experience? Of course, for gameplay purposes, for example, there were all the train stations in London were not connected together. They were all going outwards. They were each part of owned by a different company, so the rails they were not compatible between each other. But having a railway system like that in the game would have been boring from a gameplay perspective. So we kind of skewed the historical accuracy. We kept the same station, but we connected them together, so that the trains become something that's useful in the game. So it's a bit the same reasoning with the police. We need, from a gameplay perspective, a neutral force between the Templars and the assassins. It's the first time the police existed. It was created during the Victorian era, and we think it's something important for players to see. But if the players are very powerful, the Templars as well. So if the police cannot do anything about it, it doesn't feel, because as a player you have a lot of agency to create a lot of AVOC, so you need someone to kind of police it. Right. So this is the reason why we decided to go against historical accuracy in this case and equip them with weapons. Honestly, It's a very, very fine line that we have to walk. We try to walk it very carefully, but at the end of the day, we need to to realize that we're making a game and take the decision that need to be done. Take it.
And Mark, final question from me. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, when is it out and on what platforms?
Assassin's Creed Syndicate is coming out worldwide on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One on October 23rd and on PC on November 19th.
Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
This is Gamertag Radio. Voicemail 786-2737-GTR.
All right, this is Parris with Peter. We're back here at the Assassin's Creed Syndicate event, and I wouldn't introduce you, but you did such a good job before we did record it. Can you please introduce yourself?
Okay. Hello, my name's Lydia Andrew, and I'm the audio director on Assassin's Creed Syndicate.
Thank you for taking a few minutes to talk to us about the game. My question right off the jump, because you did a presentation earlier, and it just really piqued my interest. You were talking about the Victorian music in the game and how it can change just depending on the situation, who's talking about it. So can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So we did a lot of research, and also I had quite a lot of songs I kind of remembered from my childhood from living in London. And we used the music in a couple of different ways. So depending on which borough of London you're in, which district around the city, you hear different music that is inspired by or kind of makes sense for the people that live there or the kind of work they do. But we've also taken some of those tracks, which are the authentic Victorian songs or classical music or whatever it is, and we've taken specific examples of songs that we really loved and we thought really said something about that place. And we've mixed those tunes or those songs into the composed score, working very closely with our composer, Austin Wintry. We've mixed in, it's kind of like a Victorian mashup a bit. We've kind of mixed in some of the songs into his music. He's reorchestrated them and he's used them in great ways. So actually, while you're in combat or you're exploring parts of the city, you get like these little echoes, these little textures of the music coming through. And then we have this incredible score that he's composed for the game that pulls on some Victorian influences and some kind of classical music influences, but obviously also is dynamic music that's trying to support the emotions, the dynamism. We also have different instrumentation for Evie and for Jacob, the two player characters. So you might hear the same melody if you're playing as Jacob and Evie, but for Evie, you'll hear it played on a cello. We felt that instrument highlighted a lot of things about her personality, the sound. And as Jacob, you might hear a different version of the melody played on the violin. So we've really tried to use the music to immerse you in the city, to immerse you in the story, give some pace, give an emotional undercurrent, and maybe a little bit of kind of a fun approach. We've worked with having like 3 suites, almost like a kind of orchestral score. So we have suite 1 at the beginning of the game, suite 2, suite 3. And for instance, in suite 2, we took the waltz as an inspiration. So when you're in combat, it's cool because it's this kind of Victorian Gothic, like Dance of Death thing. So Jacob and Evie are doing combat and it's kind of like 1, 2, 3, punch, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it's just has a really great drama to it, but also a little bit of fun, a little bit of something different and variety. So it's pretty cool.
So just from your own standpoint, how much research has to go into getting it right, making sure you have music specifically from that era?
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it's really fun. It's really interesting. I have quite a good musical training and background myself, but still I've learned so much working on this project. It's really been a voyage of discovery and I've really enjoyed it. We actually hired a professor of musicology in the UK as well, who's a specialist in the Victorian era. His name had come up a few times when I was researching, and I found some tracks of him singing that he'd recorded. And then I was watching a BBC show, and he was on this show as well. And I was like, oh, this guy's name keeps coming up. So I contacted him, and he was invaluable. He supplied a lot of background research and also told me when I'd suggested songs, he was like, yeah, that's cool. Oh, this is like 10 years later. Maybe you want to find something else. But it's honestly been really great. And now I have this team of sound people that also know all these Victorian songs. It's really funny.
So one of the things you also mentioned during your presentation was you guys had a chance to like use your creativity and make your own songs for the game. Can you go into detail on that?
Yeah. So one of the things we decided to do, because so many of the songs that we were including in the game are kind of story songs. They're songs that are telling a story. A lot of folk songs have that tradition of talking about a particular moment in time or a particular event. So one of the things we looked at with the game was, with the writers, like, can you pick key moments in the game that you think are important in the story? And then I'd done some research and I'd known about this idea of murder ballads before, and it came back into my head, and I spoke with my colleague who's the music supervisor, and I was like, hey Christian, what do you think maybe about this murder ballad idea? Maybe we could write some songs for the game. He was like, yeah, cool. So working with Austin and working with a group called Tripod in Australia, they were the lyricists, and we wrote 6 songs that are unique to the game. They're original songs, and they talk about either particular assassinations or particular moments in the game. And then you'll hear those being sung by musicians. So maybe after sequence 5 of the game, there's a particular ending to that sequence. And then you might be in the street and you'll see this choir standing in the street singing, and you'll hear them singing about this person. And it's for the players that really explore, that really kind of get into the world and like to find everything, I think it's just another little texture.
Right.
And also, at the very end of the game, we use one of the songs as well. So I think it's nice because it's a mixture of original music from the time, the composed music, the score, and then these songs that give you another flavor, another texture.
Did you work with the voice actors at all?
Yeah, so that's something else.
Okay, and my question on that is specifically with dialects. Again, I'm a big history guy, so I eat this stuff up, so I always like asking about these things. So for that period, working with the voice actors, I mean, how critical was it to make sure that they were getting the dialects correct? I mean, like class specific or what region of the city that they were from? So
earlier, we had a presentation from Judith Flanders, who was one of the historians working on the project. And as she said, she was supplying a lot of information, historical authenticity information to the scriptwriters. The scriptwriters did a really amazing job on this project. It really was a pleasure to record the things that they'd written. And for me, because I'm from London, but I work in Quebec City, also people would ask me like, oh, how would someone say this? Does that make sense to you? And sometimes, it's a work of fiction. It's a game. So you want to make it playable and accessible for people. But at the same time, it's really nice to have that authenticity. So we did a lot of casting in the UK. We did a lot of recording in London. One thing I particularly love in the crowd is the kids. And we recorded the kids in London. They're all cast in London. A couple of kids, we found English kids that were living in Canada, so we used them for the performance capture we did. And sometimes, when I'm mixing the game, I'll be talking to my colleague and we just happen to be standing in front of 2 kids in the world, and suddenly they'll start having this hilarious little kind of Cockney urchin conversation with one another. And I realise I'm not listening to my colleague. I'm listening to the kids going, oh, you're so cool. Look at you with your little accents and everything. So it's really nice. And I do feel like with the world, the job the world team and the art team have done, I walk around the world and I'm just like, yeah, it's incredible. You do feel like you're exploring a real city. And the scriptwriters have done a great job and the voice recording team have done a really great job. So, yeah, it's nice.
Any last thing from you? Lydia, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Great.
Voicemail 786-2737-GTR.
All right, and we're back. Thank those guys for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about the game. So, Pete, really quick, what are your impressions so far since you've had some hands-on time?
Obviously, it's an early build of the game. They let us run through levels 3 and 7. So we got to have an initial introduction to the main characters, Jacob and Evie. And one of the key elements that they wanted to focus on when they came up with Syndicate was an improved movement and navigation. And I have to say, they've fixed it. There's a lot of issues that I had from Brotherhood on with navigation, moving, free, the whole free running. You can't expect it to be a YouTube video, so you got to take it with a little grain of salt. I think they improved on it. Have they perfected it? I don't know. But I really like the movement. It's improved dramatically from Unity, in my personal opinion.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you on that. I do think the movement is improved. Do I think it's a drastic improvement over Unity? Not so much. Look, this is never going to be Mirror's Edge, where you're just slipping and sliding all over the place. That's just not what Assassin's Creed is going to be. Again, it's a preview. I mean, we'll see when the final product comes out, when we get to actually review it. But I think there's still a few things that they could tighten up. And I felt myself getting stuck in the kind of that quasi cover a few times.
Agreed.
Looking at some of the buildings that I felt like I could traverse from the ground, I wasn't able to when it clearly looked like I should have been able to. So that could just be,
that could be build. Early build. That could be preview build, or maybe those things aren't, hashed out. Maybe some of the walkways haven't been completed. And then I did experience those where there were some times where I'm walking up the stairs and I got blocked by the invisible wall. But again, that could just be, preview build code that needs to be cleaned up.
Now, ironically enough, one thing I definitely like was I like the way it's, because it's open world London, you can go around, do whatever you want. I like the way the mission structure set out, side quests can pop up out of anywhere. Because, for example, when we're playing just now, they only want us to play 3 and 7, and I was in 7 doing something. I saw this icon, I was like, oh, what's this? So I go over to it, I start it up, I'm about to play it, all of a sudden one of the devs come over, oh, no, that was 4, you can't play that, so you have to stop. So that's good. It's good in a way that there's so many things out there to do that could grab your attention that you can easily divert off the path that you're
Absolutely.
on to do something else.
And I think this is one of the things that we had talked about earlier on with Witcher, where it's like you could get lost in you can get lost in the side quests and completely forget that you've got a main quest that or an objective that you've got to complete. One of the things that they introduced was the rope launcher. I don't know if you had a chance to play with that before we left the build. It reminded me a lot of Arkham Asylum, where the whole Arkham series, where Batman gets he gets to shoot the rope and he can pretty much traverse the city using that. While it's not as smooth, I don't think you can attach to every to every object, but it worked well enough to traverse and cover large quantities of areas without having to drop to the ground and then run because maybe the street was too wide for you to for your character to run and jump over it. It's little enhancements like that, which is why I think it's better than the previous iterations. I mean, you would hope that they would do improvements from game to game, but I really like it.
Now, because I guess I'm just been the negative Nancy of GTR lately, so I have to bring up something else that is not a concern. No, let me rephrase that. It's not a bad thing, but it gives me a slight pause. The fact that you have Evie and you have Jacob, these two characters, they have their own specific skill sets and things that they can do, but just like I said in the interview with Mark, you're telling me I can play this game the way I want to play it. I can do whatever I want to do. But there are specific missions where I have to play with one of the characters. So if I have this investment in Evie, her skill set, I like the way that she traverses through the open world and the weapons that she uses, and now you instantly take me out of that and make me play a mission with Jacob, I don't know if I'm going to like that yet. That I don't know.
Well, I think that's part of the narrative that they use, where you want to have both perspectives. You've got, Jacob, who's more of the brawler style, and then you've got Evie, who's more of the stealth mechanic, assassin. So it pushes you to want to see both. And I'm not going to disagree. It's not a bad idea because it takes you out of your comfort zone. Me personally, I'm probably going to, I'll try and compare it with me and my son playing. When I play a game, an action-adventure game like this, I'm more walk in and fight my way out of every situation, whereas my son, who's more cerebral than I am, and I'll give him credit for that, he is my son anyways, if he'll walk in and he'll tactically look at the field and then do everything from a stealth perspective. So in a game like this where it pulls you out of your comfort zone and it puts you into the shoes of Eevee when you're accustomed to being a brawler, that's actually not a bad thing. I like that.
I hear you, and like I said, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's just a little pause makes me think about it, because again, the message that they're giving out is play it how you want, do what you want. This is an open world, all that. But then at the same time, you're telling me, but you need to pay attention to the story, so we're going to make you do this to pay attention to the story. So which one is it? Is my question. Is this a story-driven game that just so happens to be an open world, or is this truly an open world game? Go do whatever I want. Just something to think about. We'll see. Look, as more coverage comes out, we get closer to review, and obviously when we get true hands-on with final review build, we'll see. But that's my one thing, because I'll say this. I've not been invested in an Assassin's Creed story probably since 2007. You know what I mean?
Since Brotherhood?
No, maybe Brotherhood. Probably okay. Brotherhood I was. But since then, the story isn't the reason that I would play an Assassin's Creed game. It's more of being an assassin and doing cool stealth stuff. But now we're open world, and you're telling me, do it how you want to do it. Like I say, if you wanted this to be like a Deus Ex where I can go in guns blazing or I can sneak through the back door, cool.
It's up to you.
But give
the player the option, not force it on them.
Let me have the skill set that I want to be able to do it. So again, just a nitpick. Overall, graphically, it looked fine. I mean, I don't really think there was any issues there. We were playing on the PlayStation 4. That was the build that we had.
So the new ad on the game, vehicles. Obviously, in the level that we played, we had an opportunity to jump into one of the carriages and the growler, I believe is what they call it. How did you like it?
It's a needed mechanic because the world is so big. If you had to traverse from point to point on foot without, fast travel, it would just get boring very quick. But at the same time, you do want some on foot because that's how you discover some side missions and things like that. So the fact that the option is there to quickly get from one point to another in vehicles is fine. I only had the one scenario where there was the quote-unquote vehicle combat. So we'll see how that goes as we get further into the game. But, I mean, a little small hint of Grand Theft Auto there where you can jack the driver out and you jump in and take it and stuff like that. So, I was okay with it.
Okay. I like the fact that they're bringing in your NPCs, your allies, the rooks, as they're called in the game. They can run amok through the city on their own growlers, and that's something that the player will have to build up that skill set, that gang upgrade, which I believe they had already introduced those, the gang upgrades in the previous iterations where, you had the enhanced skill set. You trained them as better fighters, but now you have more. Now you can do bribery, of police officers, which I thought was another added neatness, where, not only are you dealing with, your combat objectives, your enemies, but you're also dealing with, just neutral police officers who could just walk up in the middle of while you're fighting 6 people. Now you got to deal with them who are actually more powerful than the people you're fighting.
Yeah. I forget which developer it was. I think it was one of the interviews we were talking about after we're done. Someone had mentioned something about a city upgrade. Mm-hmm. So it almost makes me wonder if they're going that Metal Gear 5 route where you can upgrade your base and you do things like that. So, overall, I can definitely tell they're giving you a lot to do. It didn't seem overwhelming to me, going back to the Witcher analogy where you could look on that screen and you got 10 million flags everywhere and like, oh my God, which one do I go to first? They kind of let you discover them. They give you your main stuff, on the city map. And then, like I said, as you're traversing through the city, you can see side options you want to go to. If you want to go on your map, set the marker and, you're on your way. I guess final thoughts. What are you thinking so far? Is this it? Would this, from what we've seen so far, would this be something that if you played Unity and all the bugs and everything that we saw that pulled you out of the franchise, does this look like something that could bring you back?
I think Unity may have salted a lot of people on the franchise. I think this is a good step forward. Again, it's still early preview build, so I don't know how much is still missing from the final product. And we won't know, obviously, until later this year. I believe it was November for consoles and October for...
Opposite. For consoles are in October. PC is in November.
Okay. So, we're in the middle of September.
Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, they've got to be getting gold. It's going to be gold here.
This has got to be, They've got to start going to final production really, really soon. Yeah. Hopefully those small bugs that we hit here was just bugs to be cleaned up.
But see, that's the thing. I think it is our responsibility to make sure that we're pointing that out, because look, I take what happened with Assassin's Creed Unity as far as our coverage. Mm-hmm. I take it kind of personal last year because we ignored the bugs. Because it's just a preview build. We don't really need to talk about that.
And it wasn't addressed.
Yeah, and it was not addressed. Literally, what we played in the preview was the final game because all those bugs were still there. So I would say anyone listening to this, just keep that in the back of your head if you're interested about this. Make sure you pay attention to the review coverage. Pay attention to what people are saying as far as bugs and everything go. Because, look, Ubisoft knows they cannot have a repeat of what happened last year with Unity, or it could be crippling to the franchise. I saw a lot of positives with this game. Like I said, just a couple of nitpicks here and there, but that's every game. I think the production values are great. I love the level of detail that they're going into to recreate 19th century London, looking at the little things with the dialect, the music, the historical characters that can come in and out, that were around during that time period. So overall, it's looking positive.
I said, it's a positive step forward. We'll see next month when the game finally launches. I hope that it does it continues to improve and give the people what we wanted, which was it was already moving forward with Black Flag. I really enjoyed Black Flag, and then obviously Unity happened. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up for now, but with a caveat that I hope that's whatever bugs we did encounter today get fixed.
Agreed. Completely agree with that. So I guess with all that said, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here because everything's winding down now, and we're going to be leaving. So thank everybody for listening. This has been our Assassin's Creed Syndicate preview event coverage. This is Parris. That's Pete.
Yep.
And we'll probably see you guys on another podcast real soon.
You're listening to Gamertag Radio. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week.